The toast wasn't even for me. That's the part I keep coming back to. Claudia raised her glass at Thanksgiving, and it wasn't a tribute. It was a sentence. To Eleanor, she said, half smiling across the dining room table, her eyes glassy with Chardonnay and memory, still trying to be like her mother. God rest her soul. But you'll never be her. There was a pause. You'd think someone would say something, maybe clear their throat or make a joke to cut through it. But the pause held. It was tight, like the air had thickened around the chandelier above us. My daughter Becca looked down at her plate. My husband stared into his wine. The gravy boat was still making its rounds, steaming in its porcelain cradle, like none of this was happening. And then, laughter. A few chuckles from the far end. Her son Daniel gave a sharp little exhale, like he didn't want to laugh but couldn't help himself. My sister-in-law made a face like, "Oh, Claudia," but didn't say a word. I didn't move. I had my fork in my hand, paused above a scoop of stuffing I'd made myself that morning. Sage and thyme, just like my mother used to do. The fork hovered midair heavy all of a sudden. My hand shook just enough to set the silver tines vibrating. I smiled. Of course I did. That's what you do when you've been trained in silence, when your muscles remember obedience, even when your chest is split wide open. You smile. You nod. You murmur, "That's sweet, Claudia," even though the blood has rushed from your fingertips and your ears are ringing. The table moved on. Claudia began retelling the story of how my mother once stitched a man's wound shut in her church clothes after a car crash just outside town. She told it with all the warmth of someone reciting scripture. Everyone leaned in like they hadn't heard it 20 times, like it was hers to tell. I looked down at the stuffing, cold already. Becca had brought a gluten-free version that no one touched, but she beamed when Claudia praised it. I didn't say another word for the rest of the meal. After dinner, we gathered in the living room, soft jazz, playing from a Bluetooth speaker, the kids on their phones. Claudia curled in her ivory armchair, sipping brandy, her stockinged feet crossed at the ankles. The fireplace flickered. I sat on the edge of the couch like a guest in someone else's life. My husband asked Claudia if she remembered the Thanksgiving when Margaret made 3 pies, and Claudia corrected him. It was 4. Becca laughed and said Grandma was a machine. I felt like I was in a museum where all the artifacts were stolen from my childhood. Later, when the leftovers were packed and the wine was corked when Daniel offered to drive Claudia home, and the guests began gathering coats, I slipped into the coat room and sat for a minute. The door cracked an inch, voices muted on the other side. I stared at my boots. My feet didn't even hurt. That was the strangest part. I'd been on them all day, but they felt numb, as if the shock had reached my bones. I thought about my mother's eyes, sharp but kind, and how she used to press my fingers when I cried. She never said stop crying. She'd just hold my hands like she could warm me back into the world. Now Claudia held all of her. The photos, the letters, the recipes, the wedding pearls. Even her name, Margaret, had been claimed and reframed by Claudia, turned into a legend no one dared question. And now this moment, that sentence, "You'll never be her." It echoed louder than it should have. I waited until the house had gone quiet, just before midnight. I stepped back into the hallway, said a soft goodnight to Becca, who barely looked up from her phone, and walked out into the cold. I sat in my car with the engine running. The air smelled like firewood and wet leaves. My hands were trembling, but my heart wasn't broken. Not exactly. It was shedding something, and I knew what I had to do next. My mother was the kind of woman strangers cried for. At her funeral, they came in packs nurses. She trained kids she stitched up for free. A postman who swore she once saved his marriage with a glass of iced tea and a conversation on the porch. She died in her slippers with her Bible open and one of her lemon bars half eaten on the tray beside her. There were 3 casseroles at our front door before the ambulance even pulled away. Her name was Margaret, and to everyone else she was light. But to me, she was gravity, the center of everything. The kind of mother who ironed your dresses even when you were grown, who left little notes under your pillow when she knew you were breaking, who made sure you always had something to give to the church, to the school bake sale, to the neighbor with cancer. And I wanted to be her. It was never a decision. It was a current, something I was pulled into before I even had the chance to know what else I might have been. When I was 16, I got accepted into the Art Institute of Chicago, a full scholarship, something I never told anyone. Not even her. That was the same year she got sick. The same year the tremor started in her hands, and she couldn't sign the church registry anymore. I remember watching her try to write apple pie on a recipe card and her pen scratched sideways like a matchstick losing its spark. I stayed home. Took night classes at the community college, learned to cook. All her dishes took over the church newsletters, even hosted the ladies' circle in our living room once a month with fresh-baked scones and doilies from her cedar chest. Claudia was always there, not helping watching. Quiet as a breath perched on the edge of her judgment like a bird who knew the sky would eventually fall. She wasn't like my mother. Never had been. Claudia was thinner, colder, dressed in navy suits and pearls even on Sundays. Where Margaret offered warmth, Claudia offered precision. Where my mother gave her time, Claudia gave advice. Unsolicited mostly. She was 2 years younger than my mother, but had always acted older. She'd arrive late to dinners, critique the mashed potatoes, correct the stories my mother told about our childhood like she was fact-checking a documentary. Once I overheard her telling someone at church, "Margaret has the heart. I have the mind." It stung. Even then. But I still invited her in. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving year after year. Because she was family, and because my mother had loved her. When Margaret passed in a hospice bed with her hand in mine, I was 38, married with a daughter just starting school. My mother whispered to me with her final breaths, "Don't let them forget who she really was." I didn't know what she meant, but Claudia did, because after that, it started slowly. The photos went home with Claudia. Not all just the good ones, the framed ones. The one of Margaret in her wedding dress with the veil floating like morning fog gone. She said she'd scan them for everyone. I never got copies. The recipes handwritten spattered in butter and ink disappeared too. I asked once and Claudia said, "They're better off with me. You don't need paper to remember what love tastes like." Even the Christmas ornaments vanished. The lace angels my mother made from doilies the paper star Becca and I had glued together when she was 5. Claudia packed them up for safekeeping the year after Margaret died and never brought them back. And still I let her in, because I thought maybe, just maybe, being close to Claudia meant staying close to my mother. I mimicked her voice when I taught Becca how to bake. I quoted her when I gave advice to neighbors. I wore her brooch to church every year on the Sunday before Christmas. I folded napkins the same way, bought the same soap, wrote my grocery lists with the same blue pen she used. But nothing I did ever seemed to be enough. Not for Claudia. At family dinners, she'd smile and say, "Well, Margaret would have used real butter," or "She never let her gravy go cold," Or, that's not how she used to tell it. And everyone laughed. Becca laughed. Even my husband laughed. Because it was just a joke. Just Claudia being Claudia. But each time I felt something loosen inside me. A bolt slipping. A thread snapping. By the time I was in my 50s, I barely recognized myself. I had no hobbies, no voice that hadn't been borrowed, no instincts I trusted without second-guessing. I moved through my days like a ghost with her hands full of someone else's life. All I wanted was to honor my mother, to keep her alive in the folds of the everyday, and yet somehow, Claudia had made her disappear. I started noticing it in the smallest things. Becca would call Claudia first for recipes, for advice, even for gossip. Once, when she was having trouble with her mortgage paperwork, I offered to help. She thanked me politely but said I already asked Aunt Claudia she's good with that stuff. It was just a comment. A nothing comment, but it sat in my chest like an unchewed seed. Another time I overheard them laughing on the phone. Claudia's voice on speaker sharp and gleaming like a knife in sunlight. Your mother always was sentimental. You get your practicality from me. And Becca laughed. That clear, unbothered laugh I hadn't heard in years. I was folding laundry, matching socks. I remember one pair had a hole in the heel. I just kept folding. My knuckles stiff, the cotton warm from the dryer. I didn't say anything. It got worse after my husband retired. He and Claudia got on too well. She called him steady, said he had Margaret's strength. Once I was clearing the dishes after dinner and I overheard them talking about remodeling the porch. He said, Claudia's right, we should knock it down and rebuild it clean. Claudia's right. That sentence landed in my ears with a cruel kind of clarity. Not, let's talk to Eleanor. Not, I'll ask my wife. Just Claudia's right. I stared at the dish in my hand. Soap bubbles clung to the rim like frost. My heart thudded once hard. I didn't speak. Again. Because I'd spent decades learning how not to. Silence had become my safety, my training, my prison. I could feel my body aging under the weight of all the unsaid. I'd pass the mirror and not recognize the slope of my shoulders, the droop of my mouth. There were days I barely made eye contact with myself, as if I might vanish entirely if I looked too long. It was more than grief. It was erasure. I started forgetting things, what I liked, what I believed, even what I wanted for dinner. I'd ask Becca what she wanted and she'd say, I don't care, Mom. You always decide. But I hadn't decided anything in years. The rooms in my house began to feel unfamiliar. I walked into the kitchen one morning and froze, unsure why I was there. The cabinets were stocked with jars I never used. My closet was full of blouses I couldn't remember buying. I was living in a carefully constructed replica of my mother's world, but I wasn't her. And worse, I wasn't myself either. One Sunday I opened a box of old letters I had hidden in the attic. Letters I wrote in my 20s. Some were to an old college friend, some to myself. Dreams about teaching art, owning a studio, traveling. I read them all with shaking hands. That girl had vanished, and the only thing that remained was a woman who had spent her entire life auditioning for a role she was never cast in. I called Claudia that week. I don't know why. Maybe out of habit. Maybe out of some small hope. I asked if I could borrow the family photo albums, the ones from the 60s and 70s, the ones with the Polaroids of my mother in her nurse uniform and me sitting on her lap. Claudia sighed, said she'd have to dig them out. She was busy that month. When I asked again a week later, she said, they're probably better with me. You wouldn't want them to get damaged. I was 63 years old, and I was being told I couldn't be trusted with my own past. She hung up before I could say another word. That night I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on the porch with my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. I stared out at the dying hydrangeas and the brittle leaves strewn across the yard. The wind carried the sound of children playing blocks away. A dog barked. A car door slammed. I sat there for over an hour, and for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to feel the truth. She didn't just steal my mother's things. She had rewritten her. She'd slowly chipped away at the memory until only Claudia's version remained. And I had let her, out of politeness, out of fear, out of that lifelong ache to belong. But I didn't belong to her, and I didn't need to keep proving anything to the ghost of a woman I already loved more deeply than any story could capture. That night I slept deeply. No dreams, just silence. And when I woke up, something was different. Not lighter, not better, but clearer. 2 months before Thanksgiving, I got a call from a lawyer. At first, I thought it was a mistake. She said her name was Kimberly Mahoney, and she was handling the probate of Claudia's estate planning. I nearly laughed. Claudia was alive and well, still hosting bridge nights and writing checks with military precision. But the woman on the phone clarified Claudia wasn't dead. She was simply finalizing her will and had listed me as a contingent beneficiary. Contingent, she said again gently, meaning I asked. Meaning, only if the primary beneficiaries are unable or unwilling to accept the inheritance. I felt something twist in my chest. Would you like to see the document? She asked. I said yes. Of course I did. And 2 days later, I was sitting in a small beige office 1 floor above a tax prep center, staring at the last confirmation I ever needed. Claudia had left everything to Becca. Not just the jewelry, the brooch, the cameo necklace that once belonged to my grandmother, the sapphire pin my mother wore to my high school graduation, but also the photo albums, the recipe boxes, the letters my mother wrote from nursing school, my own baby book, my own wedding dress. To Rebecca Elaine Hart, the document read my beloved niece who carries Margaret's strength and heart. There was no mention of me, not one sentence, not a postscript. And somehow that omission cleaner than any insult struck harder than anything she'd said out loud. The lawyer kept watching me like I might break. Her face soft and pinched, her hands folded. I didn't break. I just sat there nodding. Did you know she was planning this? Kimberly asked gently. I shook my head. Would you like to contest? My first instinct was no. I didn't want to stir anything, but then I thought of that brooch, my mother's brooch, lying in Claudia's drawer like a trophy. I thought of my daughter receiving it like an heirloom, believing it had always been Claudia's to give. I heard myself say no. I just wanted to see, but I lied. I wanted to see because I needed to know who I was to her, and now I did. Nothing, not even a name in print. I left the office in a strange, slow fog. It had started raining, the kind of thin, uncommitted drizzle that blurred the street signs. I sat in my car for a while, watching the drops slide down the windshield like they were trying to get away from each other. There was a corner of my mind that still whispered excuses. Maybe Claudia didn't want me to feel burdened. Maybe she thought Becca would share. Maybe. But I was done with maybes. Claudia had taken everything tangible that remained of my mother, repackaged her into curated nostalgia, edited me out, and worse, she'd made my daughter the new vessel. That night, I opened a bottle of white wine and poured exactly 1 glass. I sat in the den, the one room that still felt mine, and pulled out the drawer where I kept old photos. Most were doubles, extras from Christmas cards, a few Polaroids Becca had taken on her disposable camera when she was little. But there was one photo that stopped me. My mother holding me in the hospital wrapped in a pink flannel blanket. Her eyes were tired but shining. I was reaching up not toward her face, but toward a chain around her neck. The brooch wasn't there not yet, but her smile was the same one I'd spent my life chasing. Claudia wasn't in the picture. I stared at it until the room blurred. And then I wrote a list. A short one. Things that were mine. My mother's brooch. The letters she wrote in the hospital. The blue recipe box with the chipped lid. The Christmas ornaments from 1968. The lace veil from her wedding. My baby book. The framed photo of her and me by the magnolia tree. My wedding dress? Not much, but everything. They weren't Claudia's to give, and they damn sure weren't hers to erase. I didn't sleep the night before Thanksgiving. I wasn't nervous. That surprised me. I thought I'd be jittery pacing, spiraling into guilt. But I was steady, like someone who had finally accepted a simple truth. I dressed early in quiet, a slate gray sweater, navy slacks. I wore flat shoes, nothing showy, nothing fragile. I packed a small bag, gloves, scarf, thermos of tea, and left a handwritten note on the kitchen table for my husband. Went early to help Claudia. That was it. No signature. He wouldn't question it. He never did. Claudia's house was a few miles across town, the old one with the copper gutters and the wraparound porch. She always said she saved from ruin. It used to belong to my grandparents. The house I once believed would be mine. I got there just after sunrise. Her car wasn't in the driveway. Brunch with Daniel and his wife, she'd said last week. They always went out the morning after hosting. She never locked the side door. She trusted the neighborhood. I slipped in like I'd done 100 times before, carrying pies or trays of deviled eggs. This time my hands were empty. The air smelled of cinnamon and wood polish. The kitchen was still warm from yesterday's roasting. I paused in the doorway, not from fear but reverence. The house was quiet, bathed in gray morning light, soft and waiting. I knew where everything was. The recipe box was in the dining room hutch. Chipped navy tin floral decal nearly rubbed away. I lifted it carefully, the weight familiar. Upstairs, the cedar trunk sat at the end of her bed. I had to use both hands to lift the lid. Inside, my mother's letters wrapped in faded ribbon. My baby book spine cracked. The lace angels still delicately packed in tissue. No hesitation, no second guessing. I worked methodically. I had brought padded bags. I placed each item gently, not rushed, not careless. I moved like someone preserving a life. The jewelry was in the vanity drawer. I found the brooch in a black velvet box. It had once belonged to my great-grandmother, a swirl of garnets set in a silver clasp. I held it in my palm for a long moment before setting it inside a silk pouch. The framed photo, me and my mother beneath the magnolia, sat in the upstairs hallway just outside Claudia's room. It was the only one where I was even visible. I took that too. I left her furniture, her clothes, her books. But every piece that had once belonged to Margaret I took, because they were not hers, and they were never meant to be passed on like prizes in a game I never agreed to play. I made 3 trips to the car. The neighborhood was still asleep. The sky had brightened slightly, streaked with soft amber. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes before leaving. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't tight. I felt aligned. That's the only word that fits. I didn't leave a note. What could I have said? When she returned hours later, I imagine she noticed immediately the emptiness, the gaps on the wall, the absence of the brooch in its little shrine, the photo missing from the hall. But I wasn't there to see it. That was the power. I had taken nothing that was hers, only what she stole in silence piece by piece over the years I stood smiling beside her. I didn't call her. I didn't wait for a confrontation. I knew Claudia well enough to know she wouldn't chase, not when the air had finally shifted, not when the story was no longer hers to write. The next day I made scones, not to celebrate, not out of tradition, but because I wanted the house to smell like something real. The scent of butter and lemon zest filled the kitchen warm and sharp, the kind of smell that clings to curtains, curls into your clothes. My mother used to say that good baking could soften a hard morning. I didn't feel hard exactly, just hollowed out in a clean, intentional way. I moved slowly. No rush, no music. Just the quiet thud of the oven door, the soft click of the timer. The recipe cards sat on the counter lined up like little soldiers. I didn't need them. I knew the instructions by heart, but I wanted them close. The edges were curled, some words smudged by time and butter. I traced one with my thumb and found a faded fingerprint at the corner. Her fingerprint. It felt like proof. Around 10 o'clock, Becca called. I didn't answer. She called again an hour later. Then again. The fourth time I picked up. "Mom," she said. Her voice was clipped, confused. "What's going on?" I didn't answer right away. I watched a dust mote spin in a shaft of light across the countertop. "Mom," she said again. "Aunt Claudia's freaking out. She says someone broke in, that a bunch of stuff is missing. She's saying she knows who took it," I said quietly. Silence. What I could hear her walking, maybe pacing, maybe moving into another room to get away from whoever was listening. "She's lying to you, Becca," I said. "She's been lying for a long time." Becca let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. "You stole from her. I reclaimed what belonged to me. And to your grandmother. Things that never should have been in that house to begin with." There was another pause. She didn't say anything. "Have you ever seen your own baby book?" I asked. "The one I made for you?" "Yeah, of course no," I said gently. "That was mine. Claudia took it after your grandmother died. I asked for it. She said it was safer with her." More silence. "I don't understand," she said. "She said she kept everything for the family." For the family, I repeated, tasting the phrase. She meant herself. "Why didn't you say anything before I did?" "You weren't listening." She fell quiet again. The silence felt different, less shocked, more uncertain. I could hear the shift in her breath, the gears turning. "She said you've been jealous for years," Becca finally said. I smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile, just a tired one. "She's been preparing you for this moment your whole life." Becca exhaled sharply, but I couldn't tell what it meant. "I don't want to choose sides," she said. "You don't have to," I said. "Just stop letting her speak for the dead." I hung up before she could respond. Not to be cruel, just to end it before I folded. I stood in the kitchen staring at the row of recipe cards, the steam rising from the scones. The house was quiet, still. No one came to the door. No police. No calls from lawyers. Claudia would never involve outsiders. She kept everything in the family, including shame. That afternoon, I went into the study and opened the cedar box. Inside, I found a letter. My mother's handwriting uneven, delicate, written just days before she died. Eleanor, if Claudia gets her hands on this, you may never read it. But I hope it finds you. I hope you remember that love is not something that must be earned through silence. You are not me, and that is a blessing. Let no one make you a ghost. Mom. I closed the box and sat there for a long time, my fingers pressed to the paper like it might still be warm. There was no ceremony, no music swelled, no one saw. But something in me shifted. Not joy, not even triumph. Just the quiet certainty that for once I had chosen myself. I didn't tell my husband. Not because I was afraid not anymore, but because I knew the look he'd give me. The raised eyebrow, the measured silence, the subtle way his fingers would grip the armrest of his chair just a little tighter, the way he always did when he thought I was overreacting but didn't want to say so out loud. He'd say something like, "You really think that was the right way to handle it?" And I'd smile and say nothing. Because that was our way. We didn't fight. We just quietly misunderstood each other until the moment passed. So instead, I poured him coffee that morning just like I always did. I set the cup down on the kitchen table beside the paper. He grunted a thank you, flipping past headlines he'd forget by noon. And I sat across from him pretending I wasn't a woman who had emptied another woman's house. He didn't notice anything. Not the photo albums stacked neatly in the study. Not the antique recipe box now placed at the end of our counter right where I used to keep the sugar canister. Not the framed magnolia photo now hanging above the fireplace. He didn't see it because he wasn't looking, but I was. Every morning I walked through the house and took note of the objects that had found their way home. The brooch sat in a glass dish in my bedroom. I didn't wear it. I just liked to see it glint in the morning light like something long buried and finally unearthed. The lace veil was draped over a mannequin I bought from a thrift store. Its blank canvas made it easier to honor the shape of what once was without trying to resurrect it entirely. The recipe cards, they got their own drawer, lined neatly laminated where the ink had started to fade. I caught myself reading them like scripture, not to learn but to remember. There was something sacred in the order of things. I dusted more often. I cleaned with intention. I bought real napkins for the dining table, not the paper ones from the drugstore. I found myself humming sometimes the way my mother did when she cleaned, tuneless, aimless, but full of breath. Claudia didn't call. Not that day or the day after. Not even a cold-clipped email. But Becca did. 2 days later, she showed up. No warning. Just a knock on the front door at 8:47 p.m. She looked tired, wind-burned. Her scarf loose around her neck, cheeks flushed. I hadn't seen her face in months without a screen between us. "Hey," she said. "Come in." She stepped inside and stood in the entryway, glancing around. Her eyes landed immediately on the framed photo. Her brows pinched. "Is that?" "Yes," I said. She took a breath, nodded once, and moved past me into the living room. I followed. She sat on the couch, hands in her lap. She looked older than I remembered, or maybe just more like herself. There was a kind of openness on her face I hadn't seen since she was small. She said, "You took everything Becca said." "I did." She said, "You did it out of spite." "No," I said. "I did it out of clarity." Becca looked at the floor. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. She looked so much like I used to at that age before I knew the cost of shrinking myself. "She's not answering my calls," she said. "She said you poisoned me against her." I didn't reply. She said she was the only one keeping the family's legacy intact. I let the silence stretch. I wasn't going to argue anymore, not even for my daughter's belief. Becca looked up at me, finally eyes glassy. Why didn't you ever fight back? I sat beside her, not close, but near enough to be felt. Because I thought I had to earn my way back into something that was mine all along, I said. She blinked. I thought if I kept my voice soft and my head down, someone would eventually hand me the life I was supposed to have. But it doesn't work that way. People don't give you back what they stole. You have to take it. Becca looked at me differently then. Not like a daughter looking at her mother, but like a woman looking at another woman seeing her for the first time. Can I see the letters? She asked. I stood, walked to the study, and returned with the bundle. The ribbons still tied, still faded at the edges. She took them with both hands carefully, cradled them like something alive. She didn't open them. Not yet. Just sat there holding them. And I didn't say a word, because I didn't need to anymore. The first real snow came that night. Light, soundless, a dusting that blurred the edges of everything. Becca stayed late. Too late to drive home safely. I made up the guest bed without asking the way my mother used to, with firm corners and a folded quilt at the foot. She wandered the house while I did. Quiet, curious. I saw her fingers brush the bookshelf in the hallway, pause over the spine of an old photo album. She didn't take it down. Not yet. After I turned out the lights, I sat in the kitchen alone. Just me and a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. I kept the overheads off. Only the warm glow under the cabinets lit the room. I looked around and thought, this is the house I built. Not the one I inherited. Not the one I kept performing inside. But the one I chose slowly, painfully, sometimes too late, brick by brick. My phone buzzed just after midnight. A message. Unknown number. But I knew. Claudia. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I never expected you to sink so low. No greeting. No name. No punctuation after the first sentence. I stared at it for a long moment. The quiet venom. The unshakable condescension. Even now, even in retreat, she was the one holding court. I didn't reply. I went upstairs and opened the closet in the hallway. The dress was still there, my mother's wedding dress. Cream lace aged to ivory wrapped in tissue and hung carefully on a padded hanger. I took it out, laid it across the bed. The veil, too. Becca appeared in the doorway behind me, barefoot, her arms wrapped around herself. That was hers, she asked. I nodded. She stepped closer, and I could see something shifting behind her eyes. She never let me see any of it, she said quietly. Whenever I asked about Grandma's things, she just said they were packed away, or she'd get to them eventually. I thought she was protecting them. She was protecting her version, I said. Becca reached down and touched the hem of the dress. Her fingers lingered. You look like her, she said. I didn't correct her, because in that moment it wasn't about resemblance. It was about recognition. She helped me fold the dress back up. We moved slowly like we were handling a body. When we were done, she looked at me and asked, "Did you ever think about just letting it go?" "All the time," I said, but it never let go of me. She nodded. Her face was still, thoughtful. I could feel her starting to understand not just what I did, but why I had done it. She left the next morning. No big goodbye. Just a long hug and a promise to come back soon. She said it softly, but I believed her this time. After she left, I walked the perimeter of the house, checking each window, each lock. Not out of fear, but ceremony. I was sealing it. That afternoon, I opened the albums. Page by page, I cataloged what was mine. My childhood face gap-toothed, squinting in the sun. My mother's arms around me. A paper crown on my birthday. A Halloween costume I'd forgotten. A note in the margin of one photo, Eleanor made this costume herself. She stayed up all night stitching it. Her handwriting again. The proof. The quiet love. I sat on the floor for hours. Claudia could say what she wanted. She could whisper in the dark. She could pretend to hold the keys to the past. But I had the doors now, and every one of them led back to the truth. A week passed, then 2. No word from Claudia, not even through Becca. The silence had a new texture to it, not absence, but distance. Intentional. It felt like standing in the middle of an old battlefield, the smoke finally cleared, and realizing no one else was coming. It wasn't victory, but it was over. The first Saturday in December, I drove out to the cemetery, not out of obligation. I wasn't looking for peace. I just wanted to sit with the only woman whose truth I never questioned. The cold was sharp clean, the kind that makes your breath feel like glass. I brought flowers, not roses, not lilies, just mums, plain white, the kind she liked best. Her grave was quiet, always was. I knelt, brushed away the frost, and placed the flowers just beneath the engraved stone. Margaret Helen Whitmore, 1940 to 1998. She gave more than she took. That last line always made my throat tighten, not because it was untrue, but because it left so much unsaid. She gave, and gave, and gave. And when there was nothing left, they passed her memory around like a family heirloom, polishing only the parts they wanted. I sat back on my heels and whispered, "I got it back, Mom." My voice cracked a little, but I didn't cry. Not this time. I don't know if it matters to you now, but I found your words, your cards, the veil, the picture by the tree. I took them. From Claudia. I took everything. The wind tugged at the hem of my coat. "I thought you'd be angry," I said, "for how I let her talk to me, for how I disappeared for a while even from myself. But I think maybe you'd just be glad I finally came back." A crow landed a few feet away, startling me. It stared for a long moment, then flapped its wings and took off again. I watched it disappear into the gray. That night I pulled down the Christmas decorations. Not the new ones, not the store-bought garland, or the glittering snowflakes I'd half-heartedly picked up from the discount bin years ago. I meant the real ones, the old angel made from crocheted doilies, the faded felt stockings, the garland Becca made in second grade glued from popcorn and red yarn. And at the very bottom of the cedar trunk, I found it the glass ornament my mother had etched herself. It was shaped like a teardrop. Etched across it in her exact handwriting were the words, "Home is who remembers you right." I held it in my hand for a long time. It was the kind of thing that would have shattered years ago. I'm still not sure how it survived Claudia's house, her boxes, her control. But there it was, delicate, clear with those words shining faintly in the light. I hung it on the tree that night right in the center. And for the first time in a long, long while, the tree looked complete. The invitations started arriving mid-December, the usual holiday potlucks, charity events, church recitals. The envelope from Claudia was the last one I opened. She had handwritten it like she always did in her small, elegant script. The ink was black, steady. The note itself was short Christmas brunch. My home, noon. You are welcome to attend as always. No apology, no mention of Thanksgiving, no acknowledgement of what had been taken. Just the performance of normalcy, curated sharp, unchanged. I folded the note once, then twice, and placed it in the kitchen drawer beneath the matches and rubber bands. I didn't go. That morning I made cinnamon rolls from scratch. Not from a can. Not from a boxed mix. I followed my mother's recipe card to the letter. My hands moved confidently, muscle memory born not from repetition, but from return. I lit a fire in the living room, set out the quilted tablecloth my mother had made for her last Christmas, put on the Nat King Cole album she loved. Becca arrived just before noon. She was quiet, holding a small wrapped box. Her eyes searched my face. Not for anger, for steadiness. I didn't go either, she said, pulling off her coat. Claudia's house was... She paused, shaking her head cold this year. Daniel said she didn't decorate, just put out a silver centerpiece and ordered food. I nodded. I didn't ask her why she still spoke to Claudia. That wasn't the point. We sat by the fireplace sipping cider plates full of warm rolls and candied oranges. She unwrapped the box in her lap and slid it across the table toward me. Inside was a framed photo. Not one I had seen before. It was me, early 20s, standing in front of an easel, paintbrush in hand, smiling at something off camera. The window behind me glowed with late-day sun. Becca said I found it in a storage box at Claudia's, buried under a bunch of tax documents. I don't think she meant to keep it. I don't think she even remembered it was there. My throat tightened. I thought you should have it, she said. I stared at me, the version of myself I had forgotten. Before marriage, before the mimicry, before the long years of holding my breath to be who they needed. I used to love painting, I said, my voice catching. I remember Becca said softly, You stopped right after Grandma died? I traced the edge of the frame with one finger. She added, I think maybe Claudia knew you had something else in you. That's why she needed to keep your mother's memory close. To hold the center. I looked at her then. Really looked at her. She wasn't defending Claudia. She was trying to understand the shape of what had happened. She couldn't let me become real, I said, because then she'd have to face what she did. Becca nodded. We sat there for a while, the fire crackling softly, the wind rattling against the windows. Later that evening, Becca helped me bring down an old canvas from the attic. The brushes were stiff, the paints dry, but we set them out anyway. I'll get you new ones, she said, smiling. You don't have to. I want to. She left before dusk, hugging me tightly at the door. There was no performance in it, no obligation, just warmth. After she drove off, I stood by the window and watched the snow begin to fall again, slow and heavy, blanketing the street in soft white. And behind me on the fireplace mantel, that glass ornament caught the light again. Home is who remembers you right. I turned out the lights and let the glow from the tree fill the room. And I felt for the first time in decades, not alone but whole. The new brushes arrived a week later. A small package on the doorstep wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. No note inside, just a receipt from the local art supply store and a sticker on the box that read soft round size 6. My favorite. I sat with them for almost an hour before I opened the box. Not because I was afraid to use them, but because I knew once I did, there would be no going back. You don't resurrect something like that, you reintroduce it. You ask permission. I covered the kitchen table in butcher paper. Set out a clean canvas, mixed a modest palette ochre soft teal, a muted rose gray so pale it could pass for ash. And I painted. At first just strokes, no shape. Just movement, like breathing. The bristles swept the canvas in long arcs, feathering where the pigment thinned. It wasn't good. It wasn't supposed to be. It was mine. By the third painting, my hands remembered the weight. By the fifth, I didn't care if it looked like anything at all. I stopped painting to preserve and started painting to release. That week, Becca came by twice. Once to drop off groceries I didn't ask for, and once just to sit. She didn't say much. Just asked how the painting was going, and then sipped her coffee while flipping through a photo album she used to ignore. I didn't know Grandma wrote so many letters, she said once, almost to herself. She wrote everything down I said. It was how she sorted her thoughts. Becca looked up. "Like you paint." I smiled and didn't correct her. On the fifth evening, I got another message from Claudia. This one short, just 4 words. "You've made your point." It didn't make me angry, not anymore. I read it twice and set it aside like junk mail. That was her pattern: diminish, dismiss, then invite silence. And for years I'd answered that invitation without even knowing I had. But now the line had broken. The performance was over. I didn't reply. Instead, I wrote a letter. To no one. To everyone. To my mother. To myself. I wrote about what it means to give your life to someone else's memory, what it costs to disappear in the name of reverence, what it takes to return. The letter was 5 pages long. I didn't edit it. I didn't reread it. I folded it once, slid it into the recipe box, and closed the lid. That night I took one of the paintings and placed it in the living room. It was abstract, all soft edges and buried light. No one would look at it and see Margaret. But I would. I knew where her breath lived in every corner, and that was enough. Later, as I folded laundry, the mundane things that tether you to the real, I found one of Becca's childhood drawings tucked into an old cardigan pocket. A crayon sketch of the 2 of us holding hands surrounded by stars. The paper had faded, but not the joy in it. I placed it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like an apple. For the first time in a long time, I felt no need to preserve the past exactly as it was, just to honor what was true. By New Year's Eve, the snow had begun to melt, not fully, just enough to leave the grass bruised and damp beneath its thinning cover. The world outside looked half undressed, caught between seasons. I didn't go out that night. Didn't pour champagne, didn't watch the countdown on television. I made lentil soup and folded blankets, lit candles, and listened to Ella Fitzgerald humming softly in the background. The house was mine now, not because I bought it, not because my name was on the deed, but because every room finally felt lived in by me. There was no more performance. I didn't rush to take down the Christmas tree. I left it up a little longer, letting the needles curl and fall gently across the skirt. The ornament still hung in the center. Home is who remembers you right. Claudia sent one more letter that week. Real mail. Cream envelope. Her handwriting was smaller this time. Inside was a card blank on the front, no flowers or poems. Just a single line scrawled across the inside in pen that looked slightly smeared. I suppose I was wrong to keep it all. No apology, no signature. I stared at it for a long while. Not because I wanted more, but because it felt like the closest she'd ever come to stepping off the stage. I didn't respond. That was her final curtain. I wouldn't clap. I wouldn't bow. I wouldn't throw roses. I tucked the card into the back of one of the albums, not out of sentiment but record keeping. Let it stay there flattened and still. Let it be known that she did see eventually what she had done. That afternoon, Becca came by with canvas bags full of groceries and a new watercolor palette she thought I'd like. We spent the day painting in the dining room. She tried a sky. I tried not to judge my own hands. She asked if I wanted to come to Claudia's birthday in February. No, I said softly, but you can. She nodded, then asked if she could take a copy of the magnolia photo. You don't need a copy, I said. I walked into the hallway, took it down from the wall, and handed it to her. Her eyes widened. Are you sure? I nodded, because it wasn't the only proof anymore. I had the letters, the recipes, the dress, the brooch, the painting, the silence, the noise, and above all, I had me. That night, I sat in bed and pulled out one last thing from the trunk, a pocket-sized, leather-bound journal I hadn't dared open since my mother died. On the first page in her careful script was a list. Things Eleanor will become artist leader, mother safe harbor. Underneath, written in a later, shakier hand, and something I never was free. I touched her words like they were still warm. For years, I thought becoming her was the goal. But maybe she just wanted me to become myself. Final section. Emotional landing. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.